Here's the final word. Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon with our weekly edition of the show. We've talked about the Shield Final. We've talked about the grand finals in grade cricket as well, which moves us naturally forward to the schedule for next season, which came out just as the Shield Final was being played in Adelaide. So I think we knew all of this before, but it's worth recapping some of the bits and pieces. So the season actually begins in August in the top end, where South Africa will play some white ball cricket against Australia's men. Darwin
against Australia's men who are not playing Major League Cricket in the USA.
Yes, that's true. Although that is an interesting wrinkle. Like, to what extent will CA get involved there? Right?
Zero. Yeah. 0%. They will get involved in 0%. Will Basisto is a better chance of playing in those games than some of the current first 11.
Well, I'm kind of thinking Pat. The one I'm fascinated in this coming
unicorns.
Season with the unicorn. I'm absolutely fascinated in how he's going to. And like, fair enough, right? He's got the right to pick and choose more than most as the national captain, fast bowler, and
I kind of know. I actually don't agree with that. I think if you've got a national contract, you should be playing. And if you're notionally the captain, which he's still notionally the one-day captain, he should be.
I mean more in terms of when he takes his time away from. He's got more control over the parameters than perhaps someone who's 15th on the contract list, if you know what I mean. So
sure,
as the number one. But anyway, the main interest here was that Darwin's back. It's been a long time, Jeff, and Darwin will probably be a test venue next year, as it was in 2003 and 2004 with Bangladesh scheduled to come in the FTP in this next World Test Championship cycle as well. So
Martin Love coming out of retirement, incidentally. Keen.
I'm sure he is. Matt Hayden as well. He made a stack of runs up there, didn't he? Then there's an Indian white ball series before the Ashes. I didn't realise India was scheduled to rock up to Australia
again.
They're
playing like 15 games or something.
I'm hardly surprised. It's a little bit better than last year, to be fair. Like last year, remember there was the last Pakistan white ball game was like 3 days before the first test in Perth, and it was all a bit of a shambles. This year, there's like a 13-day gap. It could compromise some of the multi-format players in the Shield cricket they play, but it won't mean they're darting back and forth across the country and skipping games and whatever else with that first Ashes test scheduled to begin on the 21st of November. And the other side of it, Jeff, is the women are not playing internationals until February, but when they do, they've got a full series against India, which will include a day-night test match at the WACA to end the summer. Now, I understand the frustration about none of this being in the school holidays, but what I didn't realise was that the WPL is moving into that January window. So it is going to mean that into the future, it will be more complicated as it relates to the Aussie women's team, because ultimately that is the school holidays, isn't it? So if you want to see the Aussie women, it'll be during, and I'm not hugely worried about this, but it was a talking point that their series against India will begin on the 15th of February when all the kids are back to school.
That is odd. So what's the new WPL window? Does it finish in mid-Feb?
I just read this in an Elisa Healy press conference. She made reference to the WPL now being in that partially in that January window. So that must mean that you're right, that the WPL will be over by mid-February, I suppose, in that scenario.
It'd be unlikely to make, I mean, half the overseas players there are Australians. To make them miss the business end would be, not good for relations between the two boards.
The Aussie women completed their flawless summer. I'm pretty sure they didn't lose a game. They lost the World Cup semi, of course, to South Africa at the very start of the season, but they pumped England comfortably, and of course they've won these T20s in a canter. They won the last game by 8 runs, not as convincingly as the first two. Georgia Vole into the side, well, not into the side, she's been there for a while now, but making 75. And then Annabelle Sutherland picking up a forfeit, the ever reliable, whether it's with bat or ball. Australia sweep the series and yes, complete a very successful Southern summer for them. And Jeff, some news this evening that a big character in the early days of the Big Bash League, Sammy J. Johnson, has retired. Having been part of that New South Wales side that won the WNCL. There's that success she enjoyed with the Brisbane Heat, a couple of premierships there in the earlier years of the WBBL. And she's retired to pursue other interests. She's going to become a mechanic. I'm not sure what her involvement will be, but in the press release, it talked about drag racing. So she's into her cars. Old school to the end, Sammy J. Johnson, who made a big contribution to domestic women's cricket over the last 10 years or so.
I mean, there were a couple of WBBL seasons where she was such a dynamic player, and she'd be pinch hitting at the top of the order. She'd be bowling and get that ball swinging away. There's the famous over against Sophie Devine when the Strikers played Brisbane Heat in the final, and I think it goes 4 sixes and then out from the fifth, and that ends up being the key because Devine doesn't make a huge score where that season she'd made 700 plus runs, and Sammy Jo's able to at least cut her off and Brisbane go on to win that game and win the title that year. So someone who did a lot despite moving around different teams, but was able to contribute in a lot of ways.
Staying with women, probably the most important, arguably the most important women's cricket of the next few months will be the World Cup qualifier in Pakistan starting a week from now. So this is for the Women's One Day World Cup that's in September and October. There are 2 available spots, and it includes 4 full member nations. So Pakistan are hosting Bangladesh, Ireland, and the Windies, and then 2 associate members in Thailand and Scotland. And Thailand, of course, who've been very, very close to qualifying for this 50-over tournament before. So that's going to be a big deal. We'll keep on top of that as much as we can from next week. But yeah, a bit like with the men, right? When it comes to the 50-over World Cup qualifying tournament, the real business end, there is so much riding on it, because if you get through, that puts you on the main stage with the best teams in the world at the most important tournament of the 4-year cycle.
Massive game in that context. Massive week in Australian contractual context. The national contract list came out for the men this week. This is always an interesting one, how they settle on what number of contracts they give out, because there's a maximum of, is it 24? And then sometimes they give out a couple fewer or one fewer. They've given out 23 this year, because there are always players who they've got an eye on who, if you play enough games, you get upgraded to a full contract. So it's got to mean there's somebody who they're expecting to play. Probably Cooper Connolly, because he gets picked for everything these days, just to be good vibes around the side. But yeah, he didn't get one, which is interesting. But it's interesting who did. Constas did get one. McSweeney didn't get one, despite leading the SA charge. It seems like they're not sure how they might use him into the future. Bo Webster's got one. That's far less surprising. I guess surprises Mitch Marsh getting one is something of a surprise, but it was mentioned, George Bailey spoke about his ability against short fast bowling, and maybe they're thinking South Africa first, they're thinking World Test Championship final first, and maybe they're also thinking England will be looking to come bringing fast bowlers if any of them are fit.
Yeah, that's bang on, I think, with and the data points to that. Like Marsh's numbers against short, quick stuff are as good as anyone in the Australian setup. So if that's what happens with England, well, and he's got a terrific record against England in Ashes cricket too. So that's one thing. But he is the T20 captain, and we're going into a cycle where eventually there'll be a T20 World Cup. So I get why he's still on contract. The bits that are, like, I guess, medium term interesting, Kuhneman ahead of Murphy. And I think that's fair. A fair reflection of the way that he bowled in Sri Lanka, but there's a long way to run in that. Nathan Lyon will be playing when he's like 46, right? So there's a long, long way to run on Kuhneman versus Murphy as the sole spinner in the post-Lyon world. Felt for McSweeney.
Yeah, if Nathan Lyon's not playing, he will be like you, parked outside Jollymont in his car, like waiting to collar something.
I feel for McSweeney, but I suppose there's clearly a test career ahead of this guy. It's just about when it happens and how it all pieces together as there's retirements in the next 2 to 3 years. And we know a lot of retirements are aligned to World Test Championship cycles, and we're coming to the end of one of those at the moment. So I don't think it's inconceivable that McSweeney plays Test cricket like in the Ashes next summer, right? It's just about how do they sequence all of that. And beyond that, it was actually quite a boring release. Like Constas getting one is expected, and we'll talk a bit more about Constas in a second in terms of World Test Championship calculations. But most of this made quite a lot of sense to me, which I suppose it's meant to when Australian cricket's going well. These aren't particularly newsy releases. It's when Australian cricket's going poorly that you're paying more attention to the contract list.
I think interesting was, a lot of fast bowlers on this list. So they've got 8 specialist quicks plus a couple of the seeming all-rounders. So you've got your Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood, Boland quartet of the old firm who will, if they're fit, will be the ones playing across the next 6 of the next 9 test matches anyway. What happens in the Caribbean is going to be interesting. They've got their next-gen quicks with Lance Morris, Joe Richardson, Nathan Ellis, more for white ball stuff, but who knows, and Xavier Bartlett, who could be all formats if he's able to come on in the way that they want. There are 3 spinners in Lyon, Kuhneman, Zampa, a couple of keepers in Carey and Inglis, and then lots of different kinds of all-rounders. So Green in there with Webster and Marsh, any of whom could be up for test selection, Glenn Maxwell and Matt Short for the T20 World Cup in 2026. And your specialist bats being Head, Khawaja, Labuschagne, Smith, Constas. So Constas the only one outside the really established crew to get a gig there. So you can see a lot about the way that this current Australian management setup is setting up their playing group for the tilt over the next couple of years.
I wonder whether Constas plays at Lords. I've sort of gone back and forth on this in my own mind. He's not going to play in the county championship barring injury, so he'll be coming in cold-ish.
Yep.
Now, Green's yet to bat. He will bat not this week, but a couple of weeks away, I believe, for Gloss.
Yeah.
Webster surely plays in that World Test Championship side. He's like built to bowl in England, and we saw indeed the way he batted in Sydney on his Test debut in conditions which will be English, air quotes.
Yeah.
On a pitch that could be similar to what they get at Lords. And don't forget Inglis in all of this. I mean, you're right to list him as a keeper there, but I sort of feel like I'd be reticent to think about any Test 11 without Inglis in it right now.
Well,
a bloke who steps up every time, right? Like Inglis is just in a grand final, right? You want players who are proven pressure guys, and increasingly I feel Inglis is one of those. So it's a tough 11 to put together.
I was trying to put it together before we recorded. I was just running through all these options, and I was trying to Occam's razor it of like, what are the things that are definitely going to be the case? Khawaja will be one of the openers. The idea that Green coming back could shift Smith from 4 seems like absolutely not. Do not do that, given that Smith has finally clicked back into more Smith-like returns. If there's anyone you don't want to mess with anything to do with how they're approaching the game, it's Steve Smith. You don't want to change the colour of his shoelaces. You don't want to change his locker number. Like, if he's made 405 tests at 4, leave him alone. Don't even talk about it. Don't even mention the possibility of him moving. That can't happen, right? So he's got to be 4. Head's got to be 5. And then you're working around the other things of, does Labuschagne still command a spot? If he does he open and let someone else bat 3? I would think if you're bringing someone else in, you'd leave Labuschagne at 3 and maybe you say to Inglis open, because either if you want Inglis in there, he's got to open or bat 3, and there's not much difference. So you might as well not move around the player who's sort of started to get back into a bit of rhythm at first drop. And then your 6 is, that's a tough choice. I think if you're looking at, is Cameron Green a better cricketer than Mitchell Marsh? Yeah, I think he is. We've all enjoyed the Mitchell Marsh comeback story, but I think Green has a much higher ceiling, and we've seen how good he can be. Is he better than Bo Webster? Does he deserve the spot over Bo Webster at the moment? If you're talking about incumbency and recent returns, no. If you're talking about ultimate ability, probably yes. I mean, that spot could go to any of 3 players.
And Bailey talked about this, that when you're thinking about a one-game, one-off final, you've got to be short-term in your thinking. And I think Webster's a lock for 6 because he'll be the 4th seamer in the way that Green was when they played at Lords in 2023. Yeah.
But is Green a better bowler than Bo Webster?
Is Green even bowling? Is Green going to bowl? Hard to know. He'll come back as a specialist bat initially with Gloucestershire. Okay. So
I think if he's not bowling, he's not in.
Or it could come down to, if you're working in a non-Constus world, if you're going on the basis that this isn't the right setting for him, you might go the other way and say, and Lawler wrote this line yesterday on Cricket et al., if a bloke who's come out and played that way against 87,000 people doesn't get daunted easily, there might be a case for that. But if you're thinking that it's a non-Constus set, then I can see a world where, as you said before, it's kind of Inglis versus Green as a specialist bat, with Carey obviously 7, no doubt in the world. Maybe with Marnus's vast experience in England, you trust him to adapt. Played for Glamorgan for the last 6 years. Maybe Marnus opens and does one of the toughest jobs in cricket, which is open the batting in England. And you give Inglis
at Lords with the slope and all that against a bloody good South African.
It's going to be really, really, really hard. And look, Marnus's spot is the other one that will be debated, and people will question why we're not immediately calling for his head. He missed out in the first innings of the final and got 61 in the second innings, caught in a leg side trap. There are some pundits who are strident in their views that Marnus must go, and I think that we talked about that through the Aussie summer as much as we can. But I come back to my previous point. Experience in those conditions, my inclination would be that Labuschagne gets the start, and the question is, do you shuffle him up to open and find a way for Inglis, or indeed Green to bat 3, and then you don't touch Smith? These are probably good problems to have for Australia. I don't think any of those are disastrous combinations.
No.
It's just a matter of making sure they feel comfortable with where they land on this, and we'll get a pretty good tell when they announce the squad in the next couple of months.
If you get them wrong, it looks awful. But like I say, it's a one-off game, so you can make a great pick based on all of the good reasoning and the good data and everything, and they can still make a pair. Or you can pick someone who probably doesn't deserve the spot, and they make 65, and it's important, and they end up contributing. It's just such a raffle.
Yeah, and just one more thing on Labuschagne. He's not going to start the season with Glamorgan, but he confirmed after the Shield final that he will play. So I suppose we're looking at a month's worth of cricket for him in Division 2. So, yeah, Labuschagne said himself his second innings dismissal, he wouldn't get out that way if he was at his most confident. So he's self-aware of where things are at. And he was clearly aware of this in Sri Lanka too. I'm not, anyone that was even tangentially engaged with that series could see that he wasn't at his most confident, but it was a complicated summer for him because, as we said, at the time, there were two crucial performances at Melbourne in the context of a thrilling test match. There was the runs
and
that he
an
made
important
in Adelaide.
one in Adelaide where they needed runs there as well.
Yeah.
So horror first test, and then 2 of the next 4 he makes match-defining contributions.
But also gets out in ways that people get angry about as well. So it's not black or white with Labuschagne. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of grey area, but I'd be really surprised if someone who's played as much in England as him doesn't get the chance in a one-off final. So that's where that's at from an Australian perspective. And just one more thing on Test cricket, but it's not really about Test cricket, but I'm making it about Test cricket. The Gabba, we didn't get a chance last week to talk about the official farewell to it. It's been announced, Jeff, 2032 Olympic final will be the final game of cricket at the Gabba.
Yep.
I think that's nice. An Olympic final is a significant moment in time, no doubt. 2 Olympic finals, indeed. One for the women, one for the men. They'll get a chance in the previous summer, though, to celebrate 100 years since the first test there in December 1931. So, we go across the Victoria Park after that, not the one where we recorded late last year, but the one that'll be built for the Olympic Games. 63,000 seat multi-purpose venue for footy and for cricket. So, that prompts all the usual conversation about where it'll sit in the pecking order of venues, and seen comments this week about SCG now needing an upgrade because Brisbane's ground will improve, and so on it goes. But purely looking at the Gabba, Jeff, it deserves a fine send-off. It's been a venue that's been criticised recently because it has been run down, but across the span of time, a lot of great things have happened on that ground.
Australia, South Africa, December 1931. That's where it started. So can we get the South Africans back? Will they still be playing cricket in 2031? Let's find out there. At least we know, because there's been so much conjecture. I think we all knew a year or two ago that the supposed plan about using the athletic centre and all that wasn't actually going to happen. It was going to be jettisoned at some point.
Yeah.
It would happen after an election, whoever, because the incumbent government didn't want to bring in a new expensive plan because they were running on a austerity and sensible economic management platform. So they had to wait until they either won or lost the election, and then essentially dump the decision in the lap of the opposition, who became the government, which maybe isn't the worst political move. Okay, if you want to spend the $5 billion on the new stadium, off you go. And that is happening. It will be. I mean, I feel for the people who are building the big rail project that had this huge station that's going to be built at Wollongabba that was supposed to be operational already. It's still probably a couple of years away, if not more, but they might get 5 years out of that station at the Gabba of getting footy and cricket crowds, and then that'll be done by 2032. But at least we know. And I think the modern Gabba isn't a ground that's loved. The history of the site is loved, but not the place itself, and playing somewhere else in facilities that are as good as they can possibly be. I don't know. I can't make the economic argument as to whether it's worth all the money you spend on it, but I know it'll be nice to go to.
Yeah, Cross River Rail was all about the Gabba, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. So the people who end up living in the high-rise buildings on the former Gabba premises will be very well looked after with their public transport.